Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I shall speak a little bit softly for those Man City fans that still have a hangover from Saturday night. You were out watching some comedy. It wasn't a brilliant game, Kieran, but it was worth it for the potty mouth interviews from the Man City players afterwards, which were hilarious. Also, all joking aside, I actually got quite emotional when Kyle Walker was being interviewed afterwards. He didn't particularly seem to want to be interviewed because he said himself he was almost lost for words, but he talked about his mother. He remembered one particular day when his mother couldn't afford £1 for ice cream for all the kids. And now here he was. And now you thought, do you know, at the heart of it, you forget that sort of level of commitment from parents who are there all the way through. I mean, Kyle Walker's journey, for want of a better word, started when he was 5 years of age. And now there he is winning the Champions League. Still furious that he didn't start the game, by the way. But yeah, congratulations to Man City. I think you'd have to be a very churlish football fan or you're a United supporter not to acknowledge that City fans only 20 years ago were two divisions below the Premier League and now they're winning the Champions League.
Yeah. I lived in Manchester for 40 years. I played for Trafford Cricket Club, and my mate the Skunk, who I used to open the bowling with, he was he still is a massive City fan, and he had to put up with a lot of flack in what was it was a fairly even dressing room, but clearly the United fans certainly had the upper hand in terms of trophies, and given that sort of all that City had to go on was Eddie Large as their celebrity fan. It wasn't a lot of bragging rights. So yeah, good luck to all the City fans. Enjoy yourself.
I'll say this only once, Kieran, but was he known as the Skunk because he was a stranger to the shower or because of what he sold for a living?
Well, it was close to the former than the latter. That's all I say.
Okay. That's well. Let's hope he's listening, and we've reminded him of happy days when his team was shit and he smelt a bit. So it's questions day, Kieran, and we've got some very interesting essay-length questions, and one mystery coming up about the connections between the USA and Wakefield, which I'm looking forward to discussing. But there is one significant piece of news, Kieran, before we get into the questions. It's been a time of uncertainty for Leeds United fans, but it looks like the ownership of the club has now been resolved.
Yes, it would appear that Leeds United's majority shareholder, Andrea Radrizzani, has accepted an offer from the San Francisco 49ers investment arm. Now, lots of people think that, therefore, we are going to have a multi-sport business here. To a certain extent, the 49ers investment arm are completely independent of the sports entity itself. It just happens to be that they're using the name and the credibility and the reputation that comes with the name. From my understanding and talking to some people who talk to some people, etc., it would appear that there has been a bit of reticence from some of the investors themselves in the 49ers investment arm as to whether this deal should go ahead. It did take Leeds longer, I think, than they expected. I think longer than anybody expected for them to get back to the Premier League in the first place. And no doubt somebody will have pointed out that with average losses in the Championship of £20 million a year, if you're just looking at Leeds United from an investment perspective, it could be a very expensive exercise. And I think that will therefore impact upon the price that's been paid. Now, the stories that are doing the rounds is that the agreed price is £170 million. I believe that Mr. Radrizzani bought his controlling interest in Leeds United for around about 45 to 50, and then he built up his shareholding. So it probably cost him somewhere in the region of 90 to 100. He'll have underwritten some losses since then. So he'll still come out of it with I suspect he'll come out with it smiling and a profit, but not as big a profit had Leeds been in the Premier League this summer, where, again, reading reading the press, it would appear that the asking price or the agreed price was somewhere in the region of 400 to 450 million. So it was a very expensive relegation from Radrizzani's perspective. But given that he wants to, and I believe has acquired Sampdoria, then he clearly needs, he needs to take money from Peter to give to Paul, in effect, or Paolo, should that be. So interesting times for Leeds fans. We don't know what the objectives are. We have had we've had Patrick from the 49ers on this show.
Yeah.
So perhaps we'll reach out to him to see what their plans are. I'm sure Leeds fans will be interested. It was a classic case of one of those relationships that starts off really positively and then rapidly declines. And we've all been in those. We've all been in those, Leeds fans. You're not alone.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of the most rapid decline in a relationship, Kieran, but my Rolodex is going to take a lot longer than the time we have to get through. Two questions, Kieran. So first of all, is Radrizzani, will he now have no link at all with Leeds, or is he retaining some shares?
No, it looks as if it's going to be a clean break.
Right.
I think that makes sense when things have broken down in terms of how fans and owners perceive each other. It's best not to leave anything behind and just move on. We saw in the case of Sunderland with Simon Donald and Stuart Donald. Simon Donald is the editor of Viz, of course. Yeah. And our friend Mr. Meffin, that probably wasn't in their interests to be hanging around at Sunderland. So they've now moved on to Eastleigh and Charlton, respectively. It would appear. I think it will be a 100% ownership by the 49ers. They will try to use their familiarity with being in the entertainment industry, and that's how they see the 49ers to leverage and to monetize the Leeds United brand, because we all know it's a very strong one. Leeds United fans, they're pretty vociferous, not just in West Yorkshire, but they've got a big international fan base as well.
Yeah, you see, if Leeds go up, Kieran, there'll be another American owner in the Premier League. We're creeping closer to that 14 majority. The second question on the Leeds things, Kieran, you say that word on the street. I presume this is the Football Finance Accountancy Avenue, SW1, is 170 million, you think, as a Championship club, 400 to 450 million as a Premier League club. I imagine Forbes probably valued at about 8 billion. But do you think, your instinct is 170 million and 4 to 450 million reasonable figures? Are they likely to be the actual figures?
Yes. They would be my gut reaction, because Leeds do have 3 years of parachute payments. They do have, I hate to say it, saleable inventory. Players, yes. Oh, okay. They will sell out Ellen Road this season, regardless of the division, and their merchandise sales and their commercial revenues were higher than most of the Premier League clubs, probably higher than half of the Premier League clubs, even when Leeds were in the Championship. So they've got a lot of positives going for them. And it's a case of rolling the dice now in terms of getting back to the Premier League and getting hold of those additional revenues. What I suspect we're looking at is £170 million plus the equivalent of transfer add-ons. If they go back after one season, X million. If it takes 2, 3 or 5 seasons, then it's going to taper to lower figures. Mm-hmm. Certainly when we've looked at other deals which have involved clubs being sold, having been relegated, there did seem to be, in the main, some form of knock-on fee should they make a rapid return to higher echelons.
Well, hopefully Mr. Radrizzani can make a slightly more rapid return to social media now than he has done, at least until Sampdoria fans started on him when they're not doing very well. It's questions day, Kieran, and our first question comes from Nobby Clark, who I assume is our old friend from the Pawson's Arms, but traditionally, of course, in the 40s, 50s and 60s, all people called Clark were nicknamed Nobby for some reason. Never quite got to the bottom of that. Something to do with the civil service, I'm told. But Nobby Clark has this question, Kieran. I know it's Nobby because he's always banging on about this in the Parson's Arms, essentially. It's an interesting one, Kieran, because we've spoken a lot recently about the fact that it's fans who get punished for the misdemeanours of club owners and directors. So Nobby has a potential solution for that. So Nobby Clark says UEFA have put several clubs on the naughty step in recent years, but usually it issues relatively paltry fines to each one. And this got me thinking, over the past decade or so, the UK has started to follow the common US practice of applying such fines or penalties to individual directors of companies, usually as well as the company itself, but occasionally in isolation. While this started with clear legislative breaches, employment law, health and safety, etc., there has been a swing towards including alleged breaches of their duty as a director. In such circumstances, UK law precludes the company from providing or financing any such fines or legal costs associated thereto. Ergo, there's a direct impact on the director themselves. Is there any reason why UEFA couldn't do the same? And if so, do you think this might dissuade clubs from flaunting FFP and the like? He puts it more directly than that in the Parson's Arms, Kieran.
Yeah, I would hope so as well.
More succinctly than that. This is a similar, it may have been Nobby who asked it before, but we've had a similar question. Put simply, Kieran, why can't you punish the directors financially rather than the fans with a points deduction?
Well, this is more of a legal than a finance issue, first of all. But I think there are a number of hurdles. First of all, the directors could appeal and say that domestic law overrides UEFA. Secondly, if they are fined, what happens if between the time of the alleged offence and the time that UEFA fines them, they move on to another job and they're no longer employed by the football club? So I think there are some practical and challenging issues. Also, what I would say is that if you've got a board of directors, they all have an individual skill set. So the commercial director might know diddly squat when it comes to finances and amortization, artificially increasing revenues, hiding wages left, right, and centre. They might be completely unaware. So it's a bit like that situation we used to have in school. You know, somebody had let off a stink bomb, and the teacher would say, "I'm putting everybody in detention unless the person who did it owns up." And then nobody owns up, and you all end up in detention. You go, "Well, I didn't do it," and at the same time, you're not going to snitch. So it does seem harsh to punish those directors who have no knowledge of these affairs. Would it have a deterrent effect? Well, you only commit an offence if you think that you're not going to be found out. That's the nature of crime and acts. And I would also say when it comes to these financial issues, it isn't a black and white situation. There are nuances, there are subtleties and shades of grey in terms of whether you are pushing things to the limit or whether you're overstepping the line. So I just think it's nice in theory, but I don't think it would work in practice. And then you'd have to say, well, how much are these fines going to be? Because if we take a look at the Premier League, the average salary of the highest paid directors in the Premier League is probably around about £900,000 a year. Now, if you go to Belgium, if you go to Portugal, if you go to Slovenia, the figures are going to be far lower. So, how do you go about setting an appropriate tariff? Because what might be a deterrent in the Premier League could completely destroy the finances of an individual who's working, let's say in Armenia or Azerbaijan for a local club. So I think there's a series of practical, and I'm sure some of our legal friends will point out legal restrictions and hurdles that would be very difficult to overcome. And then finally, what happens if UEFA themselves do something naughty, which, let's face it, they're not cherubic, are they? And do UEFA end up finding their own directors, or does a club take? Would a club therefore take UEFA to CAS or a similar a similar body because they think that UEFA has done something which isn't in the interests of football? So it's messy. Is the simple answer.
I think UEFA could look at finding the directors who left tens of thousands of Man City and Inter Milan fans boiling in coaches on the way to and from the game on Saturday night, Kieran, because as many people have pointed out, UEFA seem to be able to organise a football match all right, but can't work out ways of getting fans to and from it safely and on time. I'm glad we've cleared up that question for Nobby, because that's going to give me about 10 minutes more drinking time in the pauses before home games, the 10 minutes in which I say, Nobby, do I look like I know? I'm neither legal nor finance. I host the Football Finance Pod. I don't take much notice of any of the answers. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Jack Stace, and it's an interesting take on a subject that we've talked about a lot, which is the cost of hosting a World Cup. And Jack says, Tifo Football have done a great video looking at the cost-benefit analysis of hosting the World Cup. It seems that all things considered, doing that is a very bad deal financially for the host country. The demands of FIFA to keep 100% of profit from ticket sales and also have all of their own activities and those of their sponsors completely tax-free seems totally unreasonable. My question is, do you think the increase of countries with authoritarian governments hosting the World Cup in recent years is at least partly due to democratic leaders balking at the raw deal offered by FIFA? Of course, the next World Cup, Kieran, is in 3 so-called democratic countries. They are democratic countries. But just know Saudi Arabia are desperate to hold a World Cup in the next 3 or 4 cycles. So I think it's a very interesting question. Increasingly, do you think there will be so-called democratic countries that are balking at this deal?
Well, it's not just the deal you get from FIFA. If you look at the cost of hosting any major sporting tournament, and I think we can include the likes of the Olympics. You can even even look at Eurovision. Yeah, Eurovision can be very expensive. Remember that when Ireland used to win it every year.
Yeah,
and in the end they sort of they were prepared to sort of lob in Jedward with a song just to make sure that they didn't win it because it was costing them an absolute fortune. If you take a look at economic impact reports, and there has been some academic research done with regards to this, every World Cup has lost an absolute fortune economically, because by the time you take into consideration infrastructure costs, if we take a look at Brazil in 2014, for example, they built new stadiums in areas of Brazil where there was no demand for football, but they wanted to be able to say, hey, look, we're going, Brazil, Jesus Christ, it's a big country. And we want to spread the love. And those stadia are now, they were hosting matches 35 to 40,000, and now perhaps a tenth of that. I know that I've been to, I went to South Africa for the 2010 World Cup, and I was fortunate enough to see matches in Cape Town and Port Elizabeth. Absolutely fantastic experience. The South African hosts were amazing. Meeting other fans, it was a 4-week-long party. And like the best parties, there's a hangover, but this hangover is a financial one as much as anything else. And I remember going back to Cape Town with the Baroness a few years later. I said, I'll take you to the Cape Town Stadium because, hey, that's how I roll. And I was absolutely staggered to see the state of disrepair and reading the press locally and talking to some people. They're saying, hold on, this is costing us hospitals, this is costing us schools, because we now have to maintain a stadium which is never being used and is effectively slowly just getting worse and worse by the week and the month. And it was a wasted resource. So you've got infrastructure costs. You've also got sometimes train lines and airports being created for these short-term events. And you or I, but remember when the Pope went to the west of Ireland, and the Irish government built and extended an airport just because it could take a 747, which would arrive in Ireland once, but because they wanted the Pope there, they underwrote those costs. Well, it's really dumb economically. You've then got the increased security costs, the increased security risks, and then when it comes to tax, FIFA roll up and they say, "Oh, remember, guys, we're a charity. None of that tax nonsense is being paid by us or the players." And you go, well, actually, how on earth are you going to make money? So the only World Cup, in my view, which has made money this century was the 2006 World Cup, which took place in Germany. And the reason why that made a bit of money, and the numbers were, it made a 0.2% impact over a 1 month period as far as the German economy was concerned, because the infrastructure was there, the stadium was there, the transport links were there, the hotels were there. And it's even sort of little things. People say, well, what about all of the extra tourists? Well, this is the way that it works. If I'm thinking of going to South Africa in 2010 and I'm thinking, oh, then there's a World Cup there, I'm not going to go. I'll go somewhere else because prices will be higher, it'll be more crowded. So yes, you get more football fans turning up to these tournaments, but regular tourists actually find it a bit of a turn-off because the prices go through the roof, and it's more difficult to do the regular tourist activities. So you have to look at it on a macro perspective, and every tournament has lost money with the exception of Germany. Brazil was an absolute disaster. South Africa was an absolute disaster. We don't know the numbers for Russia because Russia is a mafiosa country. But if it's anything like the Winter Olympics was it Sochi, as far as Russia was concerned, contracts were being awarded to friends of friends of friends of oligarchs and leaders. It's a mafiosa distribution of wealth, and it certainly doesn't benefit the country as a whole.
Yeah, several things, Kieran. I don't know why I refer to Canada, Mexico and America as so-called Democrat. I sounded like Ed when he was 17. And I say we live in a democratic country. Go, yeah, so-called. Secondly, Kieran, are you suggesting that when the Holy Father visited Ireland, that rather than land in a 737, he got the ferry from Stranraer to Larne and then waited for the bus across like the rest of us had to do?
Because he should be able to walk it, shouldn't he?
What, the water bits? Yeah.
That's
you see, what you're doing there is mixing him up with the actual God. And also, one of the reasons I was never very good at geography. I have no real interest in it. I don't really care where rubber comes from, and that you have to tap it out of a tree. And partly because our geography teacher literally would say things the way you did, like, Jesus Christ, Brazil's a big country. That was
it is.
We only got taught about Catholic countries with hindsight. So if they weren't Catholics, we didn't get taught about it. So which is why I know a lot more about Ireland and Portugal than I do about Russia. This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Manscaped. If you haven't heard already, it's smooth sack summer. When you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right, this is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming are making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. It's time to get ready for summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL.
The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything you need to prepare that summer bod. Their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade. It's got a 7,000 RPM motor, a new multi-function on-off switch which can engage a travel lock, and gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when need for a more precise shave. You can also use Manscaped's liquid formulations to keep that freshness, even at the hottest summer barbecues.
So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. Ian Webb has a question that's been fascinating me, Kieran, not the question so much itself, because again, this is another area we've been discussing at length, but because it's a specific question related to Ian, I'm happy to talk about this particular angle. But I'm just fascinated how this came about, because Ian says, I'm an American supporter of an English non-league club, Wakefield AFC. We've talked about Wakefield before, Kieran. I said it's one of the biggest towns without a professional football team, I believe. I'm sure you'll remind us. But I'm fascinated, Ian. I would love you to let us know, Ian, how you became a Wakefield AFC fan. I'm going to guess it's a family thing, but that's the sort of thing I love about football, when somebody announces in an American accent that, no, I'm actually a big fan of Wakefield AFC. But Ian says it's nearly impossible for me to watch Wakefield matches. The only games that can be streamed on Facebook and YouTube are the midweek ones. I work full-time, so I can't ever watch the midweek games due to the time difference between the US and the UK. I'm certainly available to watch the Saturday games, but the club can never stream them due to the UK's nonsensical blackout rules. Who does it benefit to have these TV streaming blackouts? Now, we know there's a change coming up in the streaming rules, Kieran, but I'm assuming that won't affect Wakefield AFC.
That's right. And also, if we take a look at the recently signed deal between the EFL and Sky, although the number of matches has quadrupled from around about 200 odd to 1,000 a season, the 3 p.m. blackout has been maintained, and there's no indication that the 3 p.m. blackout is going to be withdrawn by the Premier League either. It's an interesting situation in the sense that it appears to be a UK issue only. If you take a look at the rules as far as European football is concerned, there is no 3 p.m. blackout in terms of what cannot be broadcast. The argument for the blackout is, ironically, to protect clubs such as Wakefield AFC themselves. It's effectively saying, if there is no football being broadcast live, then there is a greater chance that fans will get off their backsides, get off the sofa, and physically go and watch a match, and that will help clubs in terms of gate receipts, and therefore that will assist clubs in terms of sustainability. It will encourage more people to play the game as well. The evidence, I think it's fair to say, is fairly spotty in terms of the support of that, and this was one of the ideas, or one of the claims originally made by Bob Lord of Burnley, who I think it's fair to say, not the nicest man in the history of football. In fact, one of the most unlikable, in my view, given his somewhat, I won't even say anything. So that's the position. Now, is there any support for this impact on grassroots? Well, what we can do is that we can look at the level of attendances that take place for midweek matches, ironically, again, in the UK. And if you are supporting a club in the Championship or League One or League Two, playing matches on a Tuesday or Wednesday is a pretty common occurrence. And what we see is that when there are matches being broadcast live in the Champions League, on average, there are lower attendances in EFL matches, but it's not particularly significant. So there is a case for revisiting the blackout rule. It is 2023 when these rules were introduced. It was 30 to 40 years ago. Things have changed with regards to that. And as for Wakefield, population 333,000. Average attendance at AFC Wakefield is probably in the region of 400 to 500. So it's good to see a club set up in the town. I appreciate it is it's a rugby area, rugby league area. If you take the likes of Featherstone and Castleford are part of Wakefield, and of course you've got Wakefield Trinity itself. But I was amazed. I found out the Wakefield area was so populous, and if you compare that to somewhere such as Burnley, Burnley's got a population of 70,000, and it's hosting a Premier League football club. There is an opportunity in Wakefield. if that's what the people of Wakefield want, and and if they prefer to either have a grassroots team, and B they prefer to watch other sports, and there's a great case for saying we shouldn't be worried about towns not having football clubs, because rugby league's a fantastic sport and cricket's a fantastic sport, and if there's greater demand and interest in those sports, well, hats off to you.
Yeah, you see, if Wakefield had been a Catholic city, I would have known a lot more about it. Here, and you see that. I suppose the problem from Ian's point of view, Ian is obviously a committed Wakefield fan, but the trouble is there aren't enough of them around the world to make changing the rules here so he can watch a game on Saturday economically viable, are there? That's the issue.
Yes, and there are normally ways of watching matches. Yeah, if there's a camera with a feed there, there's a way of watching that matches. But we, of course, do not condone piracy here on The Price of Football.
We certainly don't. Not after somebody went to prison for 11 years a couple of weeks ago for doing
exactly.
That. Yes, Bob Lord. I think for those of you bemused by Kieran's reference, Bob Lord is one of those people held up as the archetypal local boy made good. He was the owner of Burnley in the 60s and 70s, had a large butcher business, chain of shop, was, as Kieran says, he point blank refused to allow TV cameras into Burnley, because he said even when the BBC had done a deal, when Match of the Day was going ahead, he wouldn't let them into Burnley, and made a grossly anti-Semitic comment about the people who ran the game and the country's finances at the time. A very unpleasant man. I don't want to discuss him in detail, but Google him and you'll come to your own conclusions about how unpleasant he was. The next question, Kieran, is from another American, from John Swift. And John says, as an American and a Tottenham fan, I have wondered what the financial impact is of having NFL games at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. How much does the NFL pay Spurs for hosting these games? And how are the ticket sales and TV income split between Spurs and the MFL? Is it comparable to what Spurs would make for a typical Premier League home match?
Well, thank you very much for this, John. When we were live at Plymouth, we spoke to one of the directors of Plymouth Argyle.
We did.
Because we were the perineum between Muse and Rod Stewart in terms of live acts at Home Park. And one of the questions asked of Paul, the director, was, how does the club make money from these type of events? And he says it's quite simple. We agree a hosting fee. Effectively, we rent out the facilities for 48 hours, agree a fee, and then there will potentially be side deals in terms of who gets it. How is the money from merchandise sales divided? How is the money from catering sales divided, and so on? When it comes to Spurs, I believe Spurs' record catering revenue arose in an NFL match. And the reason for this is that they put up the prices for NFL fans. Now, I don't know how much a pint of beer should cost, but I think it went from around about £5 to £6.90. Could have been higher than that. And everything else, it was £12 for a burger. It was £9 for a hot dog. Sort of prices which you go, blimey, O'Reilly. That does seem a bit steep. So how much Spurs make overall, John, we're not able to determine that. All I would say is that Spurs' commercial revenues have risen to £183 million in the 21-22 season, which is a record level. And this is following this deal being signed and, of course, the coming out of COVID and the impact this has. So Spurs do seem to be doing pretty well. Certainly, as far as the hospitality boxes are concerned for those type of events, they are very lucrative as well. So it's a smart, future-proofed model that they have, because I believe the pitch sort of rolls in and rolls out. Yeah. So the football pitch is undamaged by the activities of the NFL players. I've said on more than one occasion, I think Spurs as a business is, I'd give them an A or an A star when it comes to finances. I wouldn't necessarily do the same when it comes to football, but this isn't a football show, and therefore my opinion is worthless.
Yeah, well, that's not true, Kieran, but you're quite right. We'll get the lecture from Guy if we start talking about football again. I suppose as well, from Tottenham's commercial point of view, the NFL fans are in there nearly 3 times as long as normal football fans are, aren't they, as well, spending that extra money?
That's right. And also, if you take a look at the culture of NFL, where it is very much a stop-start game, the opportunities for people to have more food and drink at eye-watering prices. Because I know when I've been to the States, myself and the Barons, we always try to take in an American franchise event, and we've done NBA and NHL and so on. And I always thought, growing up as a kid, America's supposed to be cheap. Well, it ain't cheap at sporting events, and by all it's exactly the same if you're going to a concert as well. I know that my personal god, that is Robert Smith, has been fighting to get prices down for Cure concerts, and he's ended up with a huge battle with Ticketmaster. But even so, the prices of merchandise. The way that the Cure deal with this, and I was quite surprised, is that they actually had their stands outside of London, outside of Wembley Stadium, because otherwise the stadium company itself takes a huge slice, and fans get priced out. Fans get ripped off for paying for merchandise as well.
Yeah, you know how producer Guy doesn't like us talking about football. He likes us talking about the Cure even less. We've ascertained this before. I would love, do you know what? I love NFL, and I would love to go and see an NFL game at Spurs, or a baseball game, which I think is happening at Wembley in the summer. But since that episode of The Simpsons when Ned Flanders' wife got killed by a T-shirt cannon, I genuinely, I'm not taking the risk. Chris Foreman has a question, Kieran, that many people asked us in person at the start of this season. And Chris says, in the biggest and most watched league in the world, why didn't Nottingham Forest have a paying shirt sponsor this season? Which indicates that this question was written around Christmas, because they, certainly for the second part of the season, they did. But how much would that potentially have cost the club each week? There are many people amazed, Kieran. I mean, we talked last week about the fact that Internazionale had a sponsor purely for the Champions League final. It seemed very odd that Forest didn't even go for a weekly sponsor at the start of the season.
Yes. Again, I've sort of put my ear to the ground with regards to this issue. It would appear that Forest flew too close to the sun, and they demanded a fee in the region of £10 million for a front of shirt deal. It's fair to say that what we would call the middle classes of the Premier League, we know who the elite are, and everybody else is effectively middle class, are looking in the region of £6 to £8 million. Yeah, you might, if you've got a long-term relationship, or if you're one of those bigger clubs in the middle classes, you might get a wee bit more. But even Newcastle were getting, I believe, somewhere in the region of £7.5, £8 million from Fun 88. So Forest went in, they pitched high, they said, we're not prepared to compromise, and sponsors said, okay, fair enough, we don't think we're getting value for money. So therefore, they went the first half of the season without a sponsor. To be fair to Forest, they then agreed effectively a charity deal with UNICEF, I believe, or a branch of UNICEF, and that was a deal where Forest weren't getting any money, but at least we were raising the profile of a very worthwhile cause. Sometimes I think clubs do get a little bit giddy when they arrive at the Premier League. If we go back as recently as 2017, when Huddersfield Town were promoted, from what I understand, they only got around about £1.5 million for their first year revenues, as far as front of shirt was concerned. That would still be 10 times what they would be picking up in the Championship. But we are given this constant story. The Championship playoff is the most lucrative match in world football. It's stars in your eyes. It's the promised land. It's gold at the end of the rainbow. All of this narrative comes through, but it doesn't necessarily convert into as bigger numbers as people would anticipate.
Our next question, Kieran, is the sort that you love. It's a proper economics question, and it comes from Lewis Parker. And Lewis Parker says, Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget last year got me thinking about how international transfers are conducted and whether a currency crash could cause transfer negotiations to break down. For example, if an English club agreed to sign a player for 10 million euros from a club in a Eurozone country, but sudden, unprecedented events caused a devaluation of the pound against the euro, could this make a transfer suddenly too expensive?
Yes. Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget last year didn't get me thinking. It did get me shuddering, I'll be honest, as somebody that who sort of vaguely understands a bit about finance. But what happened was the value of the pound did fall. So therefore, if you had made a purchase and you had agreed to pay in dollars or euro, all of a sudden, from a sterling perspective, that increase in cost was pretty unpleasant. What clubs are doing, or rather what some clubs are doing, especially the elite clubs, is they are hedging currency payments. So let's say that we sign a player for 100 million euro and we're paying 25% immediately and then 3 installments of 25 million euro on an annual basis over the next 3 years. That's fairly standard sort of type of deal. What you can do is that you arrange to buy currency in 1 year's time through what's known as a forward contract, or you can do that via a forward option. And this is what's referred to as hedging. So you agree to buy the currency at the same time as you agree to pay the money to the club in Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, wherever it happens to be. And that way, because you've agreed a fixed price for the currency, you limit any financial losses. If you don't take that approach, then you leave the club exposed to substantial financial losses on currency exchange. It's a case of fingers crossed. And certainly when I go through the accounts of individual clubs, I do quite often see reference to currency gains and currency losses. You don't know what they're going to be at the time of the deal. If I knew what the sterling to dollar exchange rate was going to be in 12 months' time, we wouldn't be having this conversation now, because I'll be living on my own private island, with a yacht and a few helicopters and probably an exploding volcano as well for entertainment. Because of the uncertainties with regards to currency markets, we are seeing clubs increasingly use hedging deals in order to mitigate any potential currency losses that they could make.
Kieran, I'd feel really left out if you and Guy were living on your own private island with volcanoes and solid gold yachts, and I'm still here in Norbury. You mentioned earlier the price of the promotion from the Championship, and this question is from Sika Rai. On a similar theme, the Seeker says clubs getting promoted from the Championship to the Premier League can expect to earn a minimum of £100 million, we're told. My question is, how much do clubs in other countries like Spain, Germany, Italy and France expect to earn for getting promoted to their top league? That's an interesting question, Kieran, I think.
It is. It does vary from country to country, but if we take La Liga as an example of one of the other big four leagues in Europe, you would go from earning around about €7 million, which is £6 million. So that's less than clubs in the Championship get, for example. You would go from 7 million to 45, whereas in the Championship, you would go from 8 to 100. As far as the Bundesliga, Ligue 1 and Serie A are concerned, it's not quite as big, but it's still transformative, because you now are going to be on television. You're going to be hosting Bayern Munich or Barcelona. But there were some figures which have come out in the last sort of 24 to 48 hours. And you've got to give credit here to the EFL. Record attendances last season, the fifth most watched league in world football, never mind European football. The EFL Championship has more people attending it than the French top division, which is an amazing achievement, and it is a great product. So the step ups in the Premier League are the biggest. We had Neil Doncaster on the show a few weeks ago. The difference between the Championship and the Premiership is around about £500,000 as far as TV money is concerned. The big step up when it comes to Scottish football isn't actually from TV. It's the fact that you've got you know who and you know who too coming to town for 2 or 3 matches, and that has a big impact on gate receipts.
So you're going to get tweets now, Kieran, from Celtic and Rangers fans saying, which order are they in? Who's you know who and who's you know who too? Our next question, Kieran, it's from Brent Wall. It's less of a question than more of a kind of, I suppose, I don't know if there is an emoji for raised eyebrows, but I think it's asking you to sort of comment on a point, basically. Brent says, my ears pricked up last year and I heard that Oxford United had been bought by a group which included a Ninja Bakri. Hopefully Oxford United will have a better experience when the Bakri family owned the Brisbane Roar. Admittedly, it was Nureen Bakri that owned the Brisbane Roar, not the Mindra, but still the same family. Because highlights of the Bakri family's ownership of the Brisbane Roar included Ange Postecoglou leaving the club after 2 titles, unpaid ground rent, unpaid utility bills, Brett Holman taking legal action for unpaid insurance that the club received but didn't pass on, Luke Bratton quitting the club for unpaid superannuation, Robbie Fowler starting a formal dispute process for wrongful dismissal, and so on. So, first of all, can you reassure Brent that the 2 sides of the Bakri family are different people and maybe one's more responsible than the other?
I can't give that reassurance. I think we have said but that doesn't mean that there is an issue. I think we made our observation with regards to the Oyston family at Blackpool that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Or I think it was expressed at the time, the shit doesn't fall far from the arsehole. So I can't comment with regard to this. I think it's a case of let's watch and see. All that I would say is, again, I think we have given praise where it's due. The EFL have upped their game when it comes to new owners. It doesn't mean that that's always going to work, as we've seen with regards to issues at Wigan Athletic. And those players are still unpaid. I'll try to speak to one of our sports lawyers' friends to try to get a definitive answer, because I know I've read that if you're not paid for 14 days, potentially your contract could be ripped up. And we did see at Southend one of the players walk away after a series of non-payments from yet another repeat offender in the shape of Ron Martin. So there doesn't appear to be any issues at present. That's all we can say. And again, there's no reason why the offspring of somebody who doesn't behave particularly well, they don't carry the same evil gene. It doesn't work like that. So let's wait and see.
Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Tim Sparks, who probably isn't related to John Sparks, who's one of the funniest people I've ever worked with, because I know John Sparks was a made-up name, so he won't be related. Tim says, I think we can all agree that time wasting, brackets game management in new money, is one irritating element of football that we'd all like to see the back of, unless we're 1-0 up with 2 minutes to go away at Preston when it's completely condoned. See, that's the problem, isn't it, Kieran? I don't mind a bit of time wasting. Really, it's like Tim says, one person's time wasting is another person's clever game management. But Tim says, Opta show that in the Premier League in 21-22, the ball was in play for an average of only 55 minutes and 3 seconds per match. My question is this, says Tim. If football introduced a similar timekeeping rule to sports like ice hockey, which stops the clock every time the game stops, and football fans were then in the stadium for much longer, what financial benefit, if any, would there be to clubs in regards to extra takings at food and drink stands, but also extra advertising opportunities with TV rights? And also, Kieran, I'd add, that would be grossly unfair on the Parsons Arms, for example. How much will their takings go down if we're stuck in the Sellers Park for another hour each week. No one wants to be. There's several games this season, Kieran, where you don't want it to continue. 55 minutes. The Everton 0-0 draw, 55 minutes of football was enough. If we'd been given the option to stop at 55 minutes and go home, we would have all taken it. But it's an interesting question, and it is one that's increasingly being asked with the ticket prices in the Premier League going up and up. People are starting to say, well, we expect better value for our money.
Yes, and there have been tables produced by Opta and other organisations with regards to the amount of ball in play time. The club which consistently plays more football than any other is Manchester City, mainly because once they've got the ball, you can't get it off them, and they've got no desire for it to go out of the pitch. And then we've got goalkeepers who have, and this is one thing which does wind me up. Goalkeepers who when they save the ball in the last 10 minutes, feel the necessity to dive on the ground, clutching the ball for a long period of time. Personally, I'd introduce a rule that you can kick them. That would make them think twice. But this is something which has been discussed at FIFA level. My main concern is I believe that David Ellery was one of the people that was involved in making this decision. Yeah, and he's not the favourite of either of us, is he?
Well, I mean, you'd think he'd want the game to be over quickly so he can get off the tiffin. I imagine get down to Glyndebourne for. Imagine you didn't see him.
Don't knock Glyndebourne.
I wasn't going to. I was about to say I'm surprised you didn't see him down there last week, giving unnecessary yellow cards to the opera singers for not being posh enough. Carry on.
Yeah, I think if you drew a Venn diagram of people who'd been to see the Dead Kennedys followed by Don Giovanni at Glyndebourne, it might have been quite a low overlap there, featuring me.
You and David Mellor, I'd go for.
Oh, really? Okay. Fair enough. So one of the areas that FIFA have been looking at is this very issue. And to be fair to the authorities, we did see in the 2022 World Cup a significant increase in the amount of injury time. And we have seen that in some Premier League games as well. And personally, I think it's something which should be encouraged. I would go for saying 30 minutes of ball in play each half would be appropriate, and that would discourage time wasting. I'd also introduce a sin bin for time wasting, an automatic sin bin. We all know what they do. It's low level disruption which winds me up. Those players that stand over the ball when a free kick's about to be taken, or those players that will kick the ball away 10 yards when a free kick's about to be taken. It just gets on my wick. Play football, for heaven's sake.
Kieran, I guarantee when you played Sunday football, that's exactly the sort of thing you would do.
Oh, me? Oh, yeah, I was terrible.
Of course, exactly. Every person listening to this is a hypocrite, because when your team does it, you of course it's fine. It's only when the other teams do it. I'm not nearly as bothered by this as many football fans. The idea of sin bins, that's me. I know my season tickets go. If we start having sin bins, we're not having that, Kieran. This is Great Britain, for the love of God. I'm not that fussed about time. You do notice it if you're 1-0 down with 5 minutes to go. But if you're 1-0 up with 5 minutes to go, you applaud it. Let's be fair.
Yeah, I don't know. If you're paying a lot of money to go and watch a match, I want to watch a match, not people cheating.
I take that on board, but I don't know how many people are in the half-weight stand, the home bit. Let's say there are 6,000 people in the half-weight stand, a lot of whom will be complaining about this very issue, 3,000 of whom don't get back to their seats till halfway through the second half because they're finishing their drink.
That's a valid criticism.
Yeah.
That's another. Yeah. Again, I'd kick every. I remember sort of the old days where if somebody was walking out of Wimbledon, you could move in and take their ticket. If somebody's not in their seat by the time the second half starts, kick them out and have a queue of proper fans outside who take their places. That'll deal with it. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing. You look at cup finals. It was an absolute disgrace. When the
Wembley Hospitality
Brigade.
Yeah, I agree. Have we answered this question? Yes.
Well, no, I've had a moan. So, could football introduce a a stopwatch and take that responsibility away from the referee? The simple answer is yes. It was interesting, however, that the main opposition to this came from the players' union, who said, our players are already playing more minutes of football, or more minutes on the pitch, not necessarily playing football, we just meant it, than ever before because of the increased proliferation of matches, especially meaningless matches. And effectively, this would increase the amount of time being played on a match-by-match basis by 10%. And we would see more soft muscle injuries, and we'd see more players having to retire early. There was another report that came out this week that if you're a professional footballer, you are 3 times more likely to contract dementia than somebody who's not been a professional. Yeah. So footballers' welfare, which is something which gets completely disregarded, is something which has to be taken into consideration here.
Well, interesting, Kieran. In Guardiola's, it's probably an hour after the game finished last night when he ended up being interviewed live on the pitch by BT Sport, and he was clearly exhausted. But he, without being asked, there's a couple of minutes of how elated he was at winning the tournament and a few swear words, and then basically launched into an attack on UEFA and FIFA because most of his players, in fact probably all of them, have to report back for international duty in 10 days, 2 weeks' time. And he says then after that, we've got a tour. And then he says UEFA and FIFA are killing the players. So there, again, we all talk about they're professional footballers. Of course, they can play 2 games a week, whatever it is. But clearly the PFA and people in the game disagree. And also, Kieran, I think I probably undersold. You probably were the only person who saw the dead Kennedys and then Don Giovanni in the same week. But if anybody listening can gainsay that, yes. And that's one of the things I love about football. I get really cross when people say, they assume if you're a football fan, you have no interest in anything else. I'm going to the theatre on Tuesday night and I'm going to the theatre next Wednesday. I love the theatre, but I love it in a different way to the way I love football. If I could only watch, if you gave me a choice between football and theatre for the rest of my life, or football and ballet, or football and opera, of course I would choose football. Well, it doesn't mean to say you can't love them both. I love the fact that you end up having, it's normally with Julian Chenery, but there's a couple of baffled Bournemouth fans who found their way into the Parsons Arms before that game. One of them just led to me and said, do you talk about musicals every week? I said, well, no, not every week. Sometimes it's ballet, Sometimes it's opera, Our last question, Kieran, comes from Kevin Kisan, and I think this is a very interesting one. As Kevin says, what are the costs for clubs to have a police presence at football matches? Does this differ fixture by fixture, league by league? And I'd be very interested in your answer to this, Kieran, because we hear clubs lately, in the past 10 seasons, say, you'll notice how few police there are in the ground. That's because we prefer to have stewards looking after it, and it's also an indication of how safe the product is. But there are more cynical people, Kieran, not us, who say, no, it's more to do with the cost of having police in the ground. So I'd be interested in your answer to this.
Yeah, we did have PC Darren Balcombe on the show a couple of years ago, and he was saying they do a risk assessment. They effectively, a football club and the local safety officer will look at things on a match-by-match basis and effectively say this is an A, B, or a C game, and in an A game we'll have a greater police presence. If Palace are playing Bournemouth, there's no history of angstiness between the two sets of fan bases. It's there's nothing riding on the match. We don't need police officers. We'll have the police around outside the ground, and we'll do the internal stewarding. So if it's going to be a feisty match, then A, you'll have more stewards, and B, you'll have police. There have been disputes between some clubs and local police forces with regards to the level of policing historically. But I think most police forces now have specific officers who deal with things on both a home and away basis, and they've got a fairly good relationship. So I don't know the actual costs. We could do a freedom of information on this. Yeah. I did think about it, but it does take a wee bit of time to get a response. So I might do that for a few clubs just to see what the response is. But it does very much vary by fixture, and also league by league, because some leagues and some countries have more volatile fans than others. But I'm someone that in the main, I've always found the majority of police forces an absolute delight. I remember I went to Wolverhampton last season, and I was going for a curry with a mate afterwards, and I went and asked one of the local coppers, and they were absolutely brilliant. They gave us a full SP as to the curry houses to choose and avoid, and we had a great time on the back of that. Mm-hmm. The Metropolitan Police, less nice. I'll say no more.
Well, I'm not going to resort to childish name calling about police forces, Kieran, but in our experience, the Sussex police are not that nice either. In times gone by, I mean, recently, Kieran, football fans are treated as human beings for the most part by policemen, but certainly in the 70s and 80s, I had nothing but contempt and some level of fear. The South Yorkshire Police, the West Midlands Police and the South Wales Police were shameful the way they treated football fans. And there was no football police force that treated football fans properly. The police do have still some influence on football, though, Kieran, indirectly, because there's a lot of people saying how brilliant it was that the FA had scheduled last weekend's cup final, the Manchester Derby, for 3:00. But there's nothing to do with the FA. It was the police who made it a 3:00 kickoff because they didn't want too much drinking going ahead beforehand, did they?
Yes, especially with no trains.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, and that seemed to work reasonably well.
We were discussing. We wonder. I mean, I don't know if there is somebody with the surname Gone Mad, but if you had the surname Gone Mad, you'd have to become a policeman just so you'd be PC Gone Mad. How much would the Mail on Sunday love it if they could find an actual PC Gone Mad? Or a PC woke gone mad. No, there's definitely only you as at the Ted Kennedys in Glyndebourne. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that would be very kind of you. You can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered in the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with a news pod, and in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody for all the support for the show. The football season has now finished, so there'll be no football finance stories for the next 3 months until we start again in August. So we're looking forward to putting our feet up for 2 months. Is that how it works?
Yeah, remember, a lot of our listeners are accountants, so they won't get irony. So perhaps you better say to them, we will be carrying on.
Yes, we will be carrying on. Yes. We've still got a naughty step off season. Thank you for everybody from Patreon. Very kind. For as little as £1 a month, you can support the show. I think if you pay a little bit more, you can even get it advert free if you want to whiz through the show a little bit quicker. There's another way that you can support the show, and that's to go onto your app and to give us a review. And you could even say you'd rather have the show presented by two of my favourite people in sport, Claire Balding and Jack Grealish. I love Jack Grealish. I think he's absolutely fantastic. If I grew up, I'd want to be Jack Grealish as a footballer, because he doesn't talk about going in ice baths. He doesn't talk about fastidiously watching what he eats and does. He just wants to go and play football and have a good time, and he does that. And in bowl accounts, he's a fantastic brother. He's a fantastic son, and everybody loves him at both City and Villa.
He does. It's funny, isn't it? Because he looks like a bit of a weasel, doesn't he? He looks like a wrong 'un, basically. But everyone says and I love seeing him interviewed after games. Like last night again, he was so keen to find out where his dad was in the crowd and get to see his family. I love it. There's a calendar you can get that each month has a different photograph of his calves, which I don't know why I'm strangely interested in it. Also, he's got a lovely voice. I imagine Claire would do most of the talking because she's brilliant. But I think Claire and Jack Grealish would actually get on very well.
I get like a house on fire.
I'd listen to that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The Price of Football.